this looks great. This has been a fascinating discussion of politics and religion, but I'd like to hear at least a little on today's official topic. How can America move more towards a just domestic agenda? So I think this is what we were getting at right there, right? Is that what we've been talking about for the last 3-4 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was going to sort of prescribe, so how can America do it? One, we need to contemplate new solutions to the problems of the day. I think recycling old strategies is not going to be sufficient. So that's one way we can. Two, communities like ours need to decide to deploy their ethical, financial, political resources to solving the domestic issues of the day. And that even means creating the spaces for the conversation to happen. Right? Doesn't mean you have to decide what rate you think you should tax the 1%. But it should be okay in a Jewish community to talk about tax policy, rather than it being off the table because it's too controversial for the biggest donor to the synagogue. So I think tolerating the hard conversations, new solutions, bringing everything we have to bear on these very issues, and being willing to sit through the hard conversations, I would say are 3 things that we can do if we want to move towards a domestic agenda. And then, all my work has always been in coalition. And I guess I would say, again, as there's been a push and a pull in fairness. So the Jewish community has reserved more of its power and strength for international affairs. And the issues, the coalition partners have grown more complex. So affirmative action and the Baki decision, busing, urban riots, the wars in the Middle East through the 60s and 70s, who our friends are and over what things are we friends is more complicated than it was in 1964. And so it takes more effort to figure out who the coalition partners are. So I think really investing in building those relationships across lines of race and faith is another, I would say that's number 4. And then probably the last thing, I was describing the Beck campaign in a lot of detail over dinner, and I think the takeaway for me is there are places where it would feel good to be Jewish activists on a social justice issue, and then there are places where it could make a decisive difference. So on an issue like immigration reform, I'll do this really briefly. If Jews began to articulate in public that you can be tough on terror and strong on security and pro a path to citizenship, it would give cover to a whole set of moderate elected officials. Because we are the anti-terror, pro-security people. This is of primary importance to the Jewish community. It has nothing to do with comprehensive immigration reform. And if we said it, if our communal leaders said it, a bunch of elected officials wouldn't be able to hide under the security and immigration thing are inextricably linked. That's an issue where we would have a particular contribution given our history as immigrants, the exclusion we suffered in this country, the quotas, etc., maybe more so than another issue like, the right to organize a union, which is near and dear to my heart, and we have a long historical link to the labor movement, et cetera, but the strategic opportunity is different. And I would say if we really want to move towards a just domestic agenda, being incredibly strategic about which issues we organize as Jews around will make a big difference.
There's a good question up here at the top. How does the story of the Exodus from Egypt inform us today on how to address our current economic and political struggles?
It does a lot of things for me, that Exodus story. Probably the thing that sticks with me most is a little more sort of private, personal, and almost spiritual. It's we are in this narrow place. That's the feeling in American politics. There's not enough money. There's not enough revenue. Someone's going to have to give up something for others to get. And it's easy to, right, after years of oppression, right, to end up in that narrow place. And I think one of the teachings in Exodus is that you can move through that narrow place. And we need to move out of, in this scarcity mentality, there are very few solutions available. Right? It's only when you move out of that tight constriction that you find the solutions that you're looking for. So on some level, it really is about the journey that our country has to go on. So I think that's part of it. I think there is certainly, I want to say, so maybe I'll do this. You could find all sorts of things in Exodus, like the critique of a pharaoh, or how quickly we worship idols and all of that, and say, that's what we've done with finance in this country. So you could knit that together. But I grew, and I mentioned this earlier, I grew pretty tired pretty quickly of what we came to call proof text Judaism. Right? Like, the pharaoh was bad, Bain Capital is the pharaoh's empire, so Romney's bad. Yeah, well, I could prove anything, right? Really. Give me some Jewish text. I can get you any argument you want. What seems more useful for me is the religious frameworks that Judaism offers to make meaning of the current events of the day. So, the Passover story, right, starts with a celebration of our freedom. And then 49 days later, we get to Shavuos, and we celebrate the obligation that comes with the Torah, right? The obligation. And I think, in a way, that is the religious framework in which America is grappling with the issues of the day. The balance between freedom and obligation. Right? How much do we celebrate our individual freedom, and how do we own the collective obligation and responsibility? And what's so interesting is Jews have been grappling with this long before there was an America. So it's not that we invented a Jewish framework because we wanted to be relevant. Like, we have a Jewish framework, and here we found ourselves in America. Now America is debating the Affordable Care Act, and does it infringe on individual freedoms, and does it burden us with these collective responsibilities? So the Jewish framework doesn't give you the answer. And I actually think most people aren't looking for a simple answer. They're looking for some way to make sense of it. And I think Exodus and a lot of Judaism, because it's been worked over for a very long time, offers meaningful frameworks to make some sense out of a complex world and to invite us into a deeper conversation than just the sound bites that you tend to get on the news. So in that way, I think our tradition, Exodus, offers something very important for thinking about and maybe finding new roads to some of the issues that we're tackling.
This is a question about how does the Jewish community relate to the growing Hispanic community in the United States? So historically, I'll riff off this a little bit, historically, the Jewish community and African American community in the United States have had this partnership/tension. And what would be your characterization of the relationship of Jewish Americans to Latino Americans? Foolishly.
That's how we relate to them, foolishly. I mean, and this should be a bridging issue. So if you came here tonight because you don't really care about anything except Jews, that's really all you care about. You care about the Jewish future for Jews, Jews with Jews, loving Israel, Jews. If that's what you came, you should be like out there working for comprehensive immigration reform. Because when Catholic Hispanics are the predominant voting bloc in this country, wouldn't it be great that they say, well, when the chips were down for us, the Jews were there for us. And so, when the chips are down for them in Israel, I'm going to be there for them. That would be shrewd politics. So let's characterize that as a conservative position. There's another one that's like, we know what it's like. I mean, strangers in a strange, come on. Like, we know this story. We know what happened when boats came to this country and they were sent back to Nazi Germany. Like, we know all too well the immigrant story. And like, for my own family, and I'm sure for many of you here, like, my in-laws through Argentina came here illegally. Right? My parents came here, I don't know why they got in, but they got in, and New York City was like a home for them that launched them into something unimaginable as kids. Like, we know the immigrant story. So whether it's out of our Holocaust memory, or out of our prophetic vision, or out of our own lived experience in this country, or our shrewd conservative politics, the growing Latino community should be our strongest, most sort of simpatico allies. It should be so obvious, but we're by and large silent. Right? There's voices from a few organizations, and I don't mean to disrespect them, but when you think about the power the American Jewish community can bring to bear on things it cares about, and it would be unfair, our fates are so inextricably linked. So I'm one of them, and I talk a lot about this thing called the sandwich generation. Right? So there's those of us who have aging parents who need care, and we have young children who also need care, and most of those caregivers are undocumented immigrants. Right? Surely immigrants, and a huge swath of them undocumented. The notion that we can live the lives we want to live and not be concerned about the structural obstacles to those very caregivers getting a foothold in America, it's the most short-term delusion I could imagine. And so for all those reasons, this should be our most obvious ally on an issue set that should carry us forward for the next 50 years. And so far, we're not in the game.
I've heard you say several times that Jewish leaders they're not speaking up to the extent that you're looking for, or the community is not speaking up to the extent that you're looking for. To the extent, so let's stipulate that that's true. Why? Why is that? What are the characteristics that you're trying to peel back and say these characteristics are holding us back?
So I think one of them is the notion that we only have the political muscle to do one thing, and that's to protect Israel. And so everything else has to take a back seat. I think that's become the dominant wisdom in the last 20, 30 years. I think there's been, and I'm really interested in the second one because I don't know if it's true. I hear a lot, I can't talk about that because I have this one donor who will stop funding me, quit, etc. I don't know if it's true. I was one of those people who ran an organization and had donors who I was scared of what they would think. But in my experience, we were funded by the Soroses and by Bernie Marcus. Right? Two people Bernie Marcus is the founder of Home Depot. Right? He was a big Giuliani supporter. By and large, they wouldn't agree on much of anything. But in the context of a relationship, we could talk about a lot of things that weren't easy, but there was room to move forward. And so I don't know if it's true that I have this one donor who won't. Well, maybe, but did you ask? Did you explore it, etc.? So I think some of it is fear. I think some of it is that donors are playing a more activist and heavier-handed role, using their philanthropic investment to control where the conversation goes. I think there's some of that. And in a way, we don't teach it. I get a lot of rabbis in particular who call because they're approached about taking a stand on something and they don't understand. How would I decide? Who am I going to be partnering with? Is this going to come back to bite me? What is effective? What is ineffective? We've started teaching community organizing and public leadership in most of the seminaries in America. So as you're learning to become a rabbi, you learn organizing and public leadership skills. I think that kind of a change so that you'll have a generation of rabbis who think organizing and pursuing social justice is part of my rabbinate will make a big difference. Because on some level, it's just people aren't familiar with it. And as I've noticed more and more, I'm in my early 40s, people 10 years younger than me, civil rights, it might as well be the abolitionists, right? It's so long ago, it's not like, oh, this is our legacy, this is what we do. It's like, I heard a story once about this, but it's not relevant today. So we've lost that sort of cultural inheritance. We have written out the story of the Jewish left. It's like it never existed. And so why would you step into something we've never done before? Because, of course, we've always done that in this country, but that story hasn't been told. So a slew of reasons, everything from skills to fear to no track record, no history, to a political calculus that we have to reserve ourselves for one issue.
There's a question here about, to the extent that the two-party system in the United States is broken, how wise is it to very closely align American Jewry with one of the offenders of that broken system, the Democrats?
Yeah. That's a good question. We're pretty aligned, right? 78% voted for the president. I think political giving, we're heavily aligned. I think it was 12 out of the 14 members of the Obama finance team were Jews. I don't know if it's wise, but we're pretty far in. I'm not sure there's any getting out at this point. And again, if there was a Republican Party that was, if there were some Roosevelt Republicans around, like offering some good ideas, Right? I could really see healthy debate, and the community might, as we become more diverse, spread its political interests. But I think that right now, at least, the Democratic Party is significantly closer to our value set than the Republican Party, but they're not where they need to be either. I mean, the shocker to me, like Senator Dodd, a big donor approached Senator Dodd about the banking reform that they wanted to do. And the advice, this was a major finance person, he said to the senator, you shouldn't try to regulate global capital, you really don't know what you're talking about. But this consumer protection thing, like seriously protecting people from the banks, this is what you should do. And Dodd said, but the banks won't go for it. The ranking Democratic senator on the banking committee in 2009, and your answer to regulating the banks is the banks won't go for it. Like, that's a very bizarre move, right? Given what had just happened and the level of anger in this country. So, am I pleased that all we've got is the Democratic Party? No. Does it make me love this president even more? Because he is surrounded by hostile Republicans and hostile Democrats, right? He has no base of support in the Senate. So.
There's a couple presidential questions, but is there a role for Jewish study, the Talmud, the Bible, etc., in Jewish political movements?
Yeah. Right?
I'm just reading the question.
Yeah. Trying to think if it's a trick question. Again, I mean, I think because I legitimately think there is wisdom in the Jewish tradition that can be applied to the political discourse and to the solutions to our economic problems. I think the more Jewish study, the better. I mean, again, I wouldn't say like, you shouldn't study anything else. You should only study Jewish wisdom tradition to understand our politics, but for sure.
This is about the president. If the president doesn't and won't compromise, which you claim he's a tough guy, is there anything that President Obama can do to help combat the recalcitrant partisanship that is impeding our nation's progress?
Tragically, I don't think there is. I don't know what else he could do. I think from day one, he has asked, there's actually, I was at this thing with the vice president, and he told this great story. Oh, can I tell two quick stories? So when Boehner walked away from the budget deal that they thought he had with the president, they came back to the Oval Office, and one of the president's advisors said, I've known you for 20 years. I've never seen you so angry. And the president looked at him and said, I'm not angry. And this other advisor said, Mr. President, I've never been so scared. And I think that's right. I mean, he's a pretty cool customer, but I think he is frustrated by their unwillingness to do things. Cantor withdrew from the whole debt ceiling process. He called the vice president and he said, I'm going to be unable to deliver my party on the things that I told you I would do, so I'm leaving this conversation. It's Eric Cantor. Like, this is a serious problem. And I'm not sure how you break out of it. Right? I fear this election is going to polarize it more. Like, I think the president will win, but I don't think he'll have coattails that will bring dramatic new Democratic support. And so you're going to get this, he's going to win because people hate Congress. 9% approval rating? That's terrible, and they think that's Republicans, and so he's going to win. But I don't know what you do. Like, I had this dream that the second term, the next 4 years, would be like the Great Society. It would be like huge social change, unprecedented. This would be the moment. I would move to Washington. I just don't think it's going to be like that. I think he's going to win, and we're going to be stalemated again. And that scares me, because I think we need some real solutions, and they're not finding them.
Maybe we should wrap up, but I was one question, or if you just want to give, I'd like to end on a slightly more positive note than the stalemate and that, you know, your dream has been shattered. So maybe, given that the short-term dream may not be realized, maybe any last comments or thoughts to leave us with tonight from both of our guests?
Okay, I'll try to take us someplace positive, Noam. So the president, we've had 30 years of conservative political dominance in this country. Since Ronald Reagan took office, we've had this conservative revolution, and so should we read in quotes, kind of read President Obama as the first kind of attempt to turn that tanker ship around? And is that the way we should be reading what's going on with this country and with him? And that the ultimate disappointment is that people thought that it wasn't going to be that difficult. It wasn't going to be that much better. It wouldn't be that painful. It wouldn't be that confrontative. It wouldn't be that difficult for our economy. Is that the way we should read it? And in terms of American Jews, what does this mean for where you think we might be 10 years from now? If he is able to get another term, even if it's stalemated, but he's starting to turn that tanker ship in a different direction, what does it mean?
Yeah, let me focus my answer, because I've said a lot about the president, on the particularly the Jews over the next 10 years part of it. I mean, I think, yeah, I've said a lot about what I think about the president. I think I was probably like, I think there's a generational shift. It's not just about, you know, so now millennials are a larger generational cohort than baby boomers. It's like, it's a big thing. Just think about that. Right? The boomers were this massive generation, and now the millennials are bigger. So the future, right, is with the millennials. And I think what we've seen in recent weeks, months, years with them is they are proud to be Jewish and politically engaged, small p politics, in a way that was unimaginable 30 years ago. So the good news is, I think, for a long time, I think the American Jewish community's framework was, I call it cul-de-sac Judaism. Like, we've been in a ghetto a long time, and if you sort of snazzy up your ghetto, you call it a cul-de-sac. It's like they used to lock us in a ghetto, but then we just like made it the end of the street, and we chose to stay there, so now it's a cul-de-sac. And cul-de-sac Judaism is like parochial, insular, protect ourselves Judaism. And there's a woman who worked at the Cummings Foundation for 4 years who just left right around when I started. And, her name's Anya Rouse. And I was talking to Anya about the problem in fundraising for Jewish social justice, that you have the Jewish funders, the social justice funders, and they don't think these things fit. And she said to me, that's so outdated. It's like, I grew up, I went on an AJWS trip. I went to a Jewish Funds for Justice leadership training program. I participated in Avodah. To me, my experience is that Jewish and justice are connected. And I can participate in the town square of American life, not in the cul-de-sac, but in the town square as a Jew. It's not, that is a tribute to how far we've come. Because in an earlier era, the Jews who participated in American political life were more fearful of admitting they were Jews. Right? Whether it was for ideological reasons or McCarthy or anti-Semitism, right? There was fear. This generation, these millennials, they have no fear of being Jewish. They are proud. They believe their ritual, spiritual, religious life is connected to the public expression of their values. They are committed to crossing lines of race and faith, and they believe that healing and repairing the world is not a tinkering endeavor. Right? It is a life's work. It is what you put front and center, and they're totally committed to doing it, and they're not apologetic. That transformation is like the most hopeful thing happening in the Jewish community, and it almost speaks to why, if we put our muscle behind that, there's no limit on what it's possible for our community to do to help this country and what's possible over the next decade. So in that way, I'm totally optimistic. The question is like, will we catch up with what the millennials believe and are living, right? Or will we be fretting about the Jewish future while they're actually building it? And when we miss the chance to bring the Jewish future and the American future together in some very powerful way, I think the message is the future is there for us. We don't have to miss it. If we just take the leap and believe there is something Jewish to be done, and opportunities before us to go ahead and do it. So that's where I would finish.